This story is titled, My Girlfriend Said She Doesn't Love Me and Is Looking for Someone Else. When I heard this, I went gray and kicked her out, so she ran back to her ex. Hey Reddit, my name is Marcus, and I'm 30 years old. I never thought I'd be posting something like this anywhere, but life has been absolutely crazy lately, and keeping all of this bottled up in my head just isn't working anymore. I'm throwing it out here, hoping that writing it all down will clear some space in my brain and maybe help me process everything that's happened. I run a couple of online businesses, kitchen gadgets, phone accessories, that sort of thing. I managed to do pretty well for myself early on in my career. I reinvested everything back into the businesses and eventually got into rental properties as well. I'm not trying to flex or show off here. I'm just giving you this context because it becomes incredibly important later in the story. I've never been the flashy type, but I've always been the planner in any situation. You know, the guy who's always thinking 3 steps ahead and preparing for every possible outcome. At least, that's how I used to be until recently. I was engaged to Chloe, who's 29 years old. We were that couple that everybody back in high school was absolutely certain would end up together. And honestly, we did. Kind of. We started dating back in our senior year and somehow managed to stick it out through college, even when I decided to take a gap year to get my first business off the ground. She was incredibly supportive of me back then, or at least I thought she was at the time. We moved in together about 5 years ago into this really nice apartment near downtown Tampa. We had opened a shared bank account specifically for wedding planning and expenses. We had matching coffee mugs, a cat named Oscar, and all those little domestic touches that make a place feel like home. We weren't just living together, we were completely fused as a couple. That's what it felt like to me anyway. I proposed to her last year, and it wasn't anything too crazy or over the top. It was just the two of us late at night with some candles lit and her favorite playlist softly playing in the background. She cried when I asked her and said yes immediately. She told me she'd been waiting for that exact moment since we were just kids. For a while there, it genuinely felt like we were both on the same page about our future together. Then she landed this big corporate job in marketing. It came with an actual parking spot that had her nameplate on it, a brand strategy manager title, and fancy business trips. The whole executive package. I was genuinely proud of her and completely pumped about her success. She had always been incredibly sharp and super driven, so seeing her finally get the recognition she deserved felt amazing. But somewhere during those first few months in her new position, she changed completely. Or maybe she just finally stopped pretending to be someone she wasn't. It started with her becoming distant, and at first it was really subtle. Her language shifted from we to I in most conversations. She began going out with her new coworkers more frequently and would tell me that I probably wouldn't get along with them anyway, so there was no point in including me. We stopped having dinner together on a regular basis because she was always completely wiped out from work or claimed to be absolutely swamped with projects. I chalked it all up to new job stress and figured that once things settled down and she got more comfortable in her role, she'd come back down to earth and things would return to normal. The thing is, I never stopped trying to make our relationship work. I continued planning date nights for us, took care of Oscar when she forgot to feed him or clean his litter box, and would buy her favorite chai tea just because I knew it would make her smile. I made time to sit down and talk with her about her day, asking questions and showing genuine interest, even when she was barely listening to anything I had to say in return. Then one Wednesday, I decided to surprise her with something special. We had been putting together this wedding vision board, one of those Pinterest-style collections of ideas and inspiration. We had printed everything out and pinned it all to a large corkboard in our spare room. I know it sounds super cheesy, but she really loved visual planning tools and mood boards for organizing her thoughts. I had this idea to create a framed mini version of the vision board as a meaningful gift for her. I had been quietly working on this project for several weeks, carefully saving old photos of us and special moments we'd shared together. I was adding inside jokes, meaningful quotes, and little personal touches that would make it uniquely ours. It wasn't meant to be some grand romantic gesture or anything over the top. I just wanted to create something meaningful that represented our journey together and our future plans. It was supposed to be just about us and our relationship. I decided to swing by our apartment around 3:30 p.m. that day. I knew she was working from home, which had become pretty common with her new job. I didn't bother telling her I was coming over because I figured she'd be happy to see me and excited about the surprise. I had the framed vision board carefully wrapped in a gift bag, and I had even added a little sticky note on the front that said, "For all the chapters still coming." I was genuinely excited to give it to her. The place was completely quiet when I walked in through the front door. The lights were dimmed low and the curtains were half drawn, creating this almost twilight atmosphere, even though it was the middle of the afternoon. Our cat Oscar was curled up in his usual spot on the couch and barely even blinked when I walked past him. I didn't call out to announce my presence because I thought it would be nice to leave the gift on her desk and then slip out quietly, letting her discover it later as a pleasant surprise. That's when I heard her voice coming from somewhere deeper in the apartment. She was clearly on a speakerphone call, and her office door was halfway open. This was the same spare room that we had converted into a shared workspace when she started working from home more frequently. I could hear her laughing. Not just a polite chuckle, but that full-on, lose-your-breath kind of genuine laughter. It was the kind of laugh that she hadn't shared with me in months, and hearing it made me pause in the hallway. I wasn't intentionally eavesdropping. I was just frozen in place trying to process what I was hearing. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. "Tyler, don't be like that." Her voice had this playful, almost flirtatious tone that I recognized but hadn't heard directed at me in ages. "I'm not throwing this away for nothing," she continued, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Once we're married, I'll have access to everything. Just play nice until then." My hands literally started shaking as the words sank in. I'm not exaggerating. I could feel them trembling. But somehow I remained completely frozen in that hallway, unable to move forward or backward. Then she said something that felt like a punch to the gut. "He's sweet but basic, too boring to notice anything suspicious." She let out another laugh, lighter this time, almost dismissive. "Seriously, I could text you from our bed and he wouldn't think twice about it. Once things settle down after the wedding, we'll be completely set for the future." I didn't need to hear anything more. I slowly backed out of the hallway, moving as carefully as possible because I felt like if I moved too quickly, the entire floor would give way beneath my feet. I didn't even bother leaving the gift I had spent weeks preparing. I just walked straight out of our apartment. I got back in my car and sat there for several minutes, just staring at the steering wheel and trying to process what had just happened. There was no yelling, no dramatic confrontation, not even anger in that moment. There was just this quiet buzzing sensation in my chest, like my body was desperately trying to catch up to what my brain had just absorbed. I ended up driving around aimlessly for about 3 hours, with no destination in mind. I eventually found myself parked at this overlook spot that we used to visit back in college. I sat there watching the city lights slowly come on as the sun set, trying my best not to throw up. The thing that hit me the hardest wasn't just the fact that she was cheating on me. It was the calculated plan behind everything, the cold mathematics she was doing in her head. She was calculating exactly what I was worth to her and what she could potentially get out of our marriage. She was figuring out how to keep me sweet and completely oblivious until all the paperwork was signed and legally binding. In her mind, I wasn't a partner or someone she loved. I was essentially a wallet with a heartbeat. But I didn't spiral into despair or have a complete breakdown, at least not yet. Instead, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I wasn't going to explode in anger, beg for explanations, or immediately expose her and blow everything up. I was going to collect my proof quietly and carefully, methodically building a case like she thought I was too boring and basic to ever do. If she genuinely believed I was too simple-minded to notice what was happening right under my nose, then fine. She would never see it coming when I finally stopped pretending to be oblivious. I decided to stay at one of my rental properties, an empty unit located about 45 minutes away from our apartment. It was barely furnished with just the essentials, but it had reliable Wi-Fi and a decent mattress, which was all I really needed. I told Chloe that I had encountered a last-minute business issue at one of my warehouses and needed to be on site for a couple of nights to handle the situation personally. She didn't even blink when I explained this to her. She didn't ask any follow-up questions about what kind of problem had come up or offer to help in any way. She just told me to be safe and reminded me not to forget about our vendor meeting that was scheduled for Friday. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me at that point. I wasn't consumed with rage or devastated by heartbreak. I was completely focused and operating with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. It was like something in my brain had switched into a different mode entirely. All those years of running numbers, building brands from scratch, and managing teams of people had trained me for exactly this kind of strategic thinking. I just turned all of that analytical energy directly onto her and her deception. I know that probably sounds cold and calculating, but I think when someone plots against you while simultaneously calling you basic and boring, you tend to stop caring about being the nice guy who always gives people the benefit of the doubt. The first thing I did was systematically check all of our synced digital accounts and shared storage. I don't think she even remembered how extensively linked our digital lives had become over the years. We had set up shared cloud storage for photos and videos ages ago, back when we were having fun doing couple vlogs together. She had gotten bored with that project after just a few months and moved on to other interests, but we had never bothered to disconnect or reorganize the shared accounts. Sure enough, there were random photos and screenshots scattered throughout her uploads folder that she had clearly forgotten about. One particular image immediately caught my attention and made my stomach drop. It was a mirror selfie that she had taken in a hotel room that I had never been to, in a city where she had told me she was attending a marketing conference for work. I cross-referenced the date on the photo with our shared calendar, and sure enough, it lined up perfectly with the business trip where I had sent her flowers to the hotel lobby as a romantic surprise. She had never bothered to say thank you for those flowers, and now I finally understood why. I continued digging and found several more photos from that same trip. One showed her sitting across a restaurant booth with 2 drinks on the table, but the glass opposite her had a man's hand clearly visible in the frame. The hand was tan and ring-free, and when I zoomed in, I could see that Tyler had a distinctive tattoo on his wrist, the same one that matched other photos I found. There was another image from the same day showing her feet propped up on his lap in what looked like a hotel suite. She was wearing these cute socks that I had actually bought for her as a small gift. She hadn't even bothered to delete the location data from her photos. She was that confident that I would never think to check or investigate. After discovering those photos, I decided to dig deeper into her Google account. She had left herself logged in on the laptop that we kept in our kitchen drawer, the one we had designated as the wedding laptop, for coordinating with vendors, managing shared planning documents, and organizing all of our ceremony details. I clicked into her Google Drive and opened a folder that was labeled Budget Breakdown, expecting to find spreadsheets and vendor checklists. Instead, among all the legitimate wedding planning documents, I discovered a file titled Exit Strategy. I'm not exaggerating or making this up for dramatic effect. That was literally what she had named the document. When I opened it, I found what appeared to be a draft email that was clearly intended for Tyler. The content made me feel physically sick to read. The email draft contained a detailed plan that was both methodical and heartless. It read, "Once we're married, I'll start nudging him toward joint accounts for everything. We'll do a full financial merger and maybe even establish a shared LLC for the house and other major assets. His lawyer is good, but he trusts me way too much to be suspicious of anything I suggest. I'll play the supportive wife role until at least our first anniversary. Then I'll start bringing up couples therapy, maybe some time apart, a trial separation. Just test the waters and see how he reacts. He'll fold completely, he always does when things get difficult." There was no greeting, no romantic language, just raw, calculating notes laid out in bullet points like she was drafting a business proposal. The document continued with more strategic observations. Don't push the prenup conversation again. It makes him defensive and triggers his suspicions. Keep Tyler completely quiet and off social media. No tags, no texts, after 10 p.m. when Marcus might see my phone. Act surprised and hurt if anything about us leaks out. I sat there in that empty apartment just rereading that line about how he always folds, over and over again. The thing is, I had never actually folded or given up on anything important in my life. I had simply always chosen peace over conflict in our relationship. I thought that compromise and avoiding unnecessary drama was a normal part of being in love, not a sign of weakness that could be exploited. That was the exact moment when I stopped hoping that she might come clean and confess everything on her own. I finally understood with complete clarity that she never would. That night, I systematically backed up everything I had found. I took screenshots of every suspicious photo, exported copies of all the damaging documents, and made sure everything was properly date-stamped for reference. I didn't send any of the evidence to anyone else yet. I just saved it all on a separate external drive with password protection. I needed to be smart about this and think several steps ahead. Then I decided to call Riley, my older sister. She's only 3 years older than me, but she's always acted like the age gap is more like 10 years. She grew up with that classic bossy big sister energy, but somehow she never managed to make it annoying or overbearing. She's always been the one person in our family who calls people out on their nonsense before anyone else even notices there's a problem. I didn't want to explain the full situation over text messages, so I just sent her a simple message. "Need your brain for something important. Can I crash at your place for a night?" She immediately told me to come over right away, no questions asked. When I arrived at her apartment, she had already made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. Comfort food like we were kids again. She didn't ask me any questions until I had finished eating and seemed more settled. Then she just looked at me and said, "Talk." I laid out the entire story for her from beginning to end. She didn't interrupt me once during the whole explanation, just stared at the table like she was working through complex mathematical equations in her head. After I finished telling her everything, she asked me one simple question. "Do you want out of this relationship, or do you want revenge against her?" "Both," I answered without hesitation. "All right then," she said, nodding decisively. "Stop sleeping in that empty apartment. Stay here with me, and we'll work on this together properly." So for the next several days, I stayed at Riley's place while we planned my next moves. I continued checking in on my work responsibilities, answering emails, and maintaining my normal business routine so that everything appeared completely normal from the outside. Chloe didn't notice anything unusual about my behavior at all. I would call her every evening like I was completely exhausted from dealing with vendor delays and equipment problems at the warehouse. She would tell me that she missed me and that even Oscar the cat missed having me around. She even sent me a selfie of herself holding Oscar with the caption, "My boys," as if everything between us was perfectly normal and loving. Every single part of these interactions made my skin crawl, but I forced myself to smile and play along with the charade. I would text back responses like, "Looks amazing," when she sent me screenshots of wedding dresses she wanted to try on, then immediately add those messages to my growing evidence folder. She had no idea that I had already discovered her detailed goodbye letter to me that was half written to another man. The situation became even more surreal when she started asking me about a joint investment property idea that I had mentioned in passing last year. She wanted to know if we should seriously revisit that opportunity after our honeymoon, claiming it would be a solid foundation for building our future together. I told her I would think about it and that we should sit down and discuss the numbers in detail next week. She smiled and said, "I love it when you talk spreadsheets and financial planning." I nearly broke character and confronted her right then and there. Meanwhile, Riley was building a comprehensive document of her own, creating detailed timelines, cross-referencing information, and analyzing location logs from the shared photo data that I had discovered. She made it clear that we weren't preparing for a court battle or anything like that. We were just covering every possible angle in case Chloe decided to get creative with her explanations when everything finally came out into the open. And yes, that was definitely going to be the next major step in this whole process. Figuring out exactly how to end this relationship once and for all. But I wasn't planning to just walk away quietly and disappear from her life without any consequences. Not after discovering all the calculated manipulation she had been planning behind my back. I knew that the wedding itself had to be completely flipped and transformed, not simply canceled and forgotten about. That's when Riley came up with the idea that changed everything. "What if you turned the whole wedding event into a different kind of party entirely?" she suggested. "Same venue, same date, just with a completely different meaning and purpose." That's when all the pieces started falling into place and I could see a clear path forward. The next few days were unnervingly normal on the surface, which made everything feel even more bizarre and unsettling. Chloe was operating in full bride mode, with multiple Pinterest tabs constantly open on her laptop, dress appointments lined up back-to-back, and endless conversations about coordinating napkin colors with dessert options. From her perspective, the world was absolutely perfect, and everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. She even sent an email to our wedding caterer asking if they could create a signature dish named after our love story. I only knew about this because we had been using a shared email inbox for communicating with all of our wedding vendors. She signed the email with "Soon to be Mrs. Chen," which made me feel physically sick to read. But still, I didn't say anything or give away that I knew what was really happening. I continued playing along perfectly. If she texted me a heart emoji, I would send one back immediately. If she asked me questions about RSVP numbers or seating arrangements, I would give her fake responses and made-up details, just enough information to keep her from getting suspicious about my behavior or state of mind. In the background, I was quietly finalizing all the arrangements for my alternative plan. I called Shane, the venue coordinator who had worked with us during our initial venue tour several months earlier. I told him that our plans had changed significantly, and that instead of hosting a wedding, I was now throwing a private event for close friends and family members. It would still be formal and fully catered, but it would have a completely different purpose and meaning. Shane didn't ask any probing questions about what had happened. I think he could hear something in my voice that told him this wasn't the time for curiosity. He just said, "Whatever you need, man. We've got you covered." Riley took on the task of designing new digital invitations for the event. She created these minimalist black and gold designs with bold, elegant lettering that read, "Marcus's Celebration of New Beginnings." We sent the invitations out to people that we trusted completely. Obviously, my side of the original guest list, plus mutual friends who we knew would either stay neutral during any drama or who had already suspected that something wasn't quite right with my relationship. Anyone who was remotely connected to Chloe's social circle was deliberately left off the new guest list. During this same time period, I started the process of moving my personal belongings out of our shared apartment, but I did it gradually and strategically. Little by little, I removed things that I didn't want her to have access to once everything hit the fan. This included important documents, personal electronics, a vintage watch that my grandfather had left to me in his will, and a box of photos from college that I kept stored in the back of my bedroom closet. I would stop by the apartment while she was at work to keep everything quiet and avoid any confrontations. I even took down all the framed photos of us together that were hanging in the hallway and carefully packed them away in storage. Either she didn't notice these small changes, or maybe she did notice but simply didn't care enough to bring it up. The final straw that pushed me toward the confrontation came about 6 days before everything was scheduled to blow up completely. I had dinner with my parents for the first time in several weeks. I had been dodging their invitations and making various excuses to avoid spending time with them, because I knew they would immediately sense that something was wrong. Halfway through the meal, my mom set down her fork, looked directly at me and asked, "Are you okay? You seem different lately." I told her, "Yes, I'm fine." But she clearly didn't believe me. She nodded anyway and didn't push the issue further. My dad gave me one of those long, searching looks across the dinner table. The kind where you know he has about 20 questions lined up and ready to go, but he's waiting for you to be ready to talk about whatever is bothering you. I told them that the wedding was still happening as planned, and that I was just dealing with work stress and normal pre-wedding anxiety. We didn't discuss the situation any further that evening, but I think both of my parents could feel the undercurrent of tension. Something significant was breaking apart in my life, and I wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. I finally decided to confront Chloe 2 days later. It was a Friday afternoon, and she had come home early from work for once. When I walked into our apartment, I found her sitting on the couch in comfortable sweatpants with her laptop open, watching wedding videos on YouTube like it was her full-time job. I walked in acting like I hadn't been preparing for this exact moment for weeks. I was calm and steady, completely in control of my emotions. She looked up when she heard me come in and smiled at me like absolutely nothing in the world was wrong. "Hey babe, you're back early today," she said, in that cheerful, innocent tone that I now knew was completely fake. I didn't smile back at her, and I didn't lean down to kiss her like I normally would have. Instead, I walked over and sat down across from her on the other side of the coffee table. It was the kind of deliberate positioning that immediately signals that we're not going to be having casual small talk today. I looked directly at her and said, "So tell me, how long has Tyler been back in your life?" She froze completely. That bright, fake smile didn't even have time to fade naturally. It just shattered and disappeared from her face instantly. Her entire body tensed up like I had just fired a gun in the middle of our living room. "What?" she said, blinking rapidly like maybe she had misheard what I was asking. "You heard me perfectly," I replied calmly. "How long has Tyler been back in your life?" She gave this little nervous, fake laugh, the kind of sound she always made when she was desperately buying time to think of a response. She brushed her hair behind her ear and tilted her head slightly, like I was being completely unreasonable and asking ridiculous questions. "Okay, what is this supposed to be? Are you seriously accusing me of something right now?" Instead of answering her question, I reached into the bag I had been carrying and pulled out the thick folder I had been preparing for weeks. I dropped it onto the coffee table with a dull thud that seemed to echo through the quiet apartment. Inside were printed screenshots, dated photos, and a complete copy of her exit strategy document with all of her bullet-pointed plans laid out in her own words. I didn't say anything at all. I just let the physical evidence speak for itself. She leaned forward slowly and cautiously, like she was afraid the papers might explode. She scanned the first page, then flipped to the second, and I watched her face change as the reality of the situation sank in. Her fingers hesitated noticeably when she reached the third page because she recognized exactly what it was. After a long minute of complete silence, her facial expression shifted dramatically. It wasn't sadness or guilt that I saw in her eyes. It was pure panic. She wasn't upset about being caught in lies. She was terrified about the consequences of her plans being exposed. "That's private information," she said, her voice rising slightly. "You went through my personal stuff without permission." I nodded once, completely calm. "Yeah, and you went through our entire relationship like it was some kind of side quest in a video game." She stood up suddenly and crossed her arms, like gaining physical height was somehow going to help her regain control of the situation. "You violated my privacy," she said, her voice getting louder and more desperate. "That's actually insane behavior. Do you even hear yourself right now?" "I hear you loud and clear now," I replied, maintaining my calm tone. "I heard everything when you were on that phone call with him. I read your detailed strategy to drain me dry financially and then disappear from my life. I've seen more than enough evidence." "You hacked into my personal accounts," she accused, pointing at me like I was a criminal. "I opened the shared Google Drive that we've both had access to for 4 years," I corrected her. "You labeled the folder as wedding planning stuff, Chloe. You literally stashed your exit plan right underneath our guest list spreadsheet." She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again without saying anything. She couldn't come up with a real comeback, just empty noise and deflection. She started pacing around the living room nervously. "This is completely crazy," she said, her voice shaking now. "You're blowing everything way out of proportion. You went looking for problems and then twisted innocent things into what you wanted to find." "No," I said firmly, shaking my head. "I didn't go looking for any of this. You left it all right in front of me because you were so absolutely certain that I would never bother to look. You thought I was basic and boring, remember? Too stupid to notice anything suspicious. That's exactly what you told Tyler, right?" She stopped pacing immediately. Her face dropped like someone had just turned off all the lights behind her eyes. The fight went out of her completely because she knew I had heard her exact words. "You're throwing away 4 years of our life together over one mistake," she said weakly. "One mistake?" I almost started laughing at the absurdity of that statement. "You had a detailed document planning the exact timeline of when you would start pushing me to combine all of our financial accounts. You were literally arranging a slow-motion robbery." She stepped forward, and I could see that her voice was shaking now. "We can fix this situation," she said desperately. "We've gotten through rough patches before. Marcus, please don't do this to us. We were almost at the finish line." "No, we weren't," I said, standing up to look her directly in the eyes. "You were almost at your finish line. I was already buried so deep in your lies that I couldn't see daylight." I picked up the folder from the coffee table and looked at her one final time. "The wedding is off." She shook her head frantically. "No, you can't just say that like it means nothing. You're actually unbelievable. You're really willing to ruin my entire life over this?" "You ruined yourself," I replied calmly. "I'm just done pretending that I didn't see it happen." She blinked rapidly and I could see tears starting to form. "So that's it? You're just walking away from everything we built together?" "Not just walking," I said, picking up the evidence folder. "I'm actually running at this point." I turned toward the front door and started leaving. She called after me, her voice cracking with emotion. "You'll regret this decision. You don't just get to throw away a whole life." I left the apartment and didn't look back even once. After I walked out of the apartment, Chloe immediately started texting me nonstop. She sent me long paragraphs, voice notes, and message after message that alternated between, "How could you do this to me?" and "Please, let's talk this through rationally." I didn't respond to any of them. After the third voicemail hit the 7-minute mark and included a complete crying breakdown about how this wasn't supposed to be the plan, I finally blocked her number entirely. 2 days later, I received a formal letter from her attorney that completely caught me off guard. She was actually suing me for multiple things: defamation, harassment, invasion of privacy, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The legal document claimed that I had caused her severe emotional trauma by spreading false information about her character. It also alleged that I had illegally hacked into her digital accounts and that my actions constituted an intentional character assassination campaign. When I finished reading the entire thing, I actually laughed out loud. Not because the situation wasn't serious, it definitely was, but because it was so damn predictable and pathetic. Fortunately, my lawyer Mr. Clark was completely ready for this kind of retaliation. He's this quiet, unassuming guy who doesn't raise his voice or make dramatic gestures, but he systematically dismantles people in the most professional way possible. We filed a counterclaim almost immediately, citing emotional deception, documented long-term psychological manipulation, and intent to misrepresent financial motives in a relationship that was directly tied to legal marriage contracts. Clark calmly told me, "She opened this door, so now we're going to walk right through it." A few days after the legal papers started flying, Chloe's parents decided to get involved and began harassing my parents directly. Her mother, Linda, sent this incredibly long and ridiculous email to my mom, calling me vindictive and cruel. She accused me of humiliating their daughter over what she described as a simple misunderstanding. Linda claimed that the stress of wedding planning had made Chloe act erratically, and that I should have handled the situation like a mature man, instead of hiding behind files and documents like a coward. Her father, Robert, actually had the audacity to call my dad and leave a voicemail message saying that I had completely ruined their family's reputation and destroyed their daughter's future prospects. My dad listened to the entire rant, then called Robert back and said, "Marcus didn't ruin anything. Your daughter did that all by herself, and we have the documentation to prove it." After that conversation, we didn't hear from Chloe's parents again for quite a while, but I had a feeling that something else was brewing behind the scenes. The reason I was so confident about all of this drama was simple. I hadn't actually canceled our wedding at all. Instead, I had completely replaced it with something entirely different. So here we are, finally arriving at the big day itself. The day that was originally supposed to be our wedding ceremony, when we would be standing together under a beautiful floral arch, reading vows that we had written in a shared Google document, while our parents cried happy tears and our friends pretended not to judge our musical playlist choices. Instead, I woke up that morning in Riley's comfortable guest room with natural sunlight streaming through the blinds. I had a mental checklist already forming in my head before I even brushed my teeth. I had a sharp suit hanging in the closet. Not the expensive tuxedo that I had originally picked out with Chloe's input, but something much better. It was a deep navy blue, custom-tailored, and I decided to wear it without a tie. The overall look was sharp, clean, and definitely not the appearance of a guy who had been left at the altar. I was showing up to this event looking like someone who had successfully dodged a slow-motion train wreck. My date for the event, Zoe, pulled up to Riley's house around noon. We had originally met through mutual friends a few months back at a casual game night. She had completely destroyed everyone at Uno and called me out for cheating when I tried to stack penalty cards unfairly. After that evening, we started talking more frequently. Casual text messages, occasional memes, nothing too serious or romantic. She was just one of those people who's effortlessly funny and doesn't take life too seriously. When everything with Chloe had imploded spectacularly, I had vented to Zoe about the whole situation one night over text messages, and she had been incredibly supportive without being dramatic about it. We arrived at the venue early, around 1:30 p.m., and I was amazed by the incredible job that Shane and his team had done with the transformation. All of the wedding-specific decorations were completely gone. There were no signs with cursive fonts announcing Marcus and Chloe's special day, no monogrammed initials etched onto glass surfaces, and no romantic floral arrangements that spelled out our names. People started trickling into the venue around 2:30 p.m., and some of them looked genuinely confused. I mean, you receive an invitation that mentions new beginnings. Then, you walk into a venue where you thought you'd be watching a traditional wedding ceremony. I don't blame them for being puzzled. But after a few minutes, the overall vibe caught on, and people started to understand what was happening. My friends were cool about the whole thing. They knew just enough of the backstory to avoid asking too many probing questions. My cousins showed up dressed like they were attending a prestigious award show. Even my old high school basketball coach made an appearance and slapped me on the back saying, "I heard enough of the story to know this situation wasn't your loss." The food was excellent, the music was perfectly chosen, and people were genuinely laughing, dancing, and enjoying themselves. Every once in a while, someone would lean over and whisper, "So what really happened with you and Chloe?" I would just smile mysteriously and say, "Let's just say I decided to change the guest list at the last minute." And then, around 4:15 p.m., everything suddenly paused and the entire atmosphere shifted. She actually showed up. Chloe showed up wearing white, of course. It wasn't her actual wedding dress, thank God. But she had chosen this fancy white jumpsuit like she was still trying to claim ownership of the day somehow. Her hair was professionally done and her makeup was flawless. Like she knew there would be cameras present and had come prepared to spin this situation into something that worked in her favor. She looked like she was ready to give some kind of public statement. People noticed her the instant she stepped through the entrance. The conversation stopped immediately, though the music kept playing in the background. But everyone's eyes were completely locked on her, watching to see what would happen next. I watched her scan the room carefully, processing what she was seeing. She didn't recognize the setup or the decorations. She didn't see her parents anywhere, and she didn't spot any of her friends. What she did see was me standing next to Zoe, laughing casually with Shane and a couple of friends from work, holding a plate of mini sliders like I didn't have a care in the world. Our eyes met across the room, and I didn't move or react at all. She walked further into the venue like she expected someone to stop her or ask her to leave. When nobody did, she continued walking until she reached the edge of the dance floor. She stood there for a moment like she was about to deliver some kind of prepared speech, but no one offered her a microphone or gave her a platform. Zoe leaned over and whispered quietly, "That's her, I'm guessing?" I nodded once, staying completely calm and composed. Chloe finally spoke up, her voice carrying across the room. "So this is what you decided to do with our day?" A couple of people near her shifted uncomfortably. I think they thought a full dramatic scene was about to unfold right there on the dance floor. Honestly, I was expecting the same thing, but I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of creating chaos or drawing more attention to herself. I simply said, "What exactly did you think was going to happen? You marry me, slowly bleed me dry financially, and then disappear when you got everything you wanted?" She physically flinched like I had hit her with a spotlight. The truth of her plan being stated so clearly in front of all these people clearly caught her off guard. "I didn't come here to fight with you," she said, trying to maintain some dignity. "I just thought maybe we could talk privately and work this out like adults." Zoe raised an eyebrow and said dryly, "Bit late for that approach, don't you think?" Chloe glanced at Zoe briefly, then looked back at me with a mixture of hurt and anger. "So this is your way of publicly humiliating me? Turning what was supposed to be our wedding into some kind of celebration without me?" "No," I said, shaking my head calmly. "The humiliation was entirely your own doing. I'm just wrapping up the loose ends and moving forward with my life." A few people in the crowd started clapping slowly. It wasn't obnoxious or over the top, just a quiet, awkward show of approval. I didn't expect that reaction, and neither did she. Chloe looked around the room one more time, and I think that's when the full reality of the situation finally hit her. The venue was mine, the guests were my friends and family, and she simply didn't belong here anymore. There was no role for her to play, no narrative for her to control, and no way for her to salvage this situation. To her credit, she didn't throw a tantrum or break down crying in front of everyone. She didn't start screaming or making accusations. She just stood there for another moment, nodded once like she finally understood that it was over, and turned around. She walked out of the venue without saying another word. The rest of the party picked right back up almost immediately. It was almost eerie how quickly the energy bounced back to normal. It was like a collective sigh of relief had been exhaled by everyone in the room. People started dancing again. Conversations resumed, and the whole atmosphere became lighter and more relaxed. Someone even requested that classic empowerment song by Kanye, and it felt perfectly fitting for the moment. When the evening finally ended, I stood at the edge of the empty room and looked around at the remnants of what had been an unexpectedly successful event. It definitely wasn't what I had originally pictured this day being like when I first started planning a wedding months ago. But in a weird way, it was actually better than what I had imagined. There were no fake vows being exchanged, no lies wrapped up in ivory lace and expensive flowers, and no secret deals being made behind my back with other people. Just truth. Messy, loud, and completely satisfying truth. And for the first time in months, I felt genuine peace. The Monday morning after the party, I woke up to find 41 notifications on my phone. There were also 2 missed calls from a phone number that I didn't recognize. I didn't even bother checking them right away because I wanted to ease into the day normally. I made my usual coffee, fed Oscar. Yes, I managed to get our cat back. Small victory there. And sat on the balcony for a while just enjoying the quiet and processing everything that had happened. Only then did I finally open my phone to see what all the commotion was about. Apparently, Chloe had decided to go completely public with her version of events. She had posted what could only be described as a full-blown essay on Instagram. It was formatted as black text on a white background, like she was issuing some kind of official press release to the world. This was followed by a carefully staged sad selfie, where her eyes were just puffy enough to suggest that she had been crying, but still filtered enough to blur any imperfections and make her look sympathetic. The caption started with, "This isn't how I wanted things to go," and it just kept going from there. Paragraph after paragraph about how relationships are complicated and challenging, how people change in unexpected ways, and how she was deeply hurt by the cruel and vindictive actions that had been taken against her on what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. She positioned herself as the victim of some kind of elaborate revenge plot. The comment section was absolutely wild to read through. Half of her friends were in full support mode, posting the usual responses like, "You deserve so much better, babe," and "Sending you love and strength during this difficult time." You know, the typical pity parade that always shows up when someone posts dramatic relationship content online. But then the rest of the internet showed up, and things got interesting. Someone from the party must have shared details about what really happened. Or maybe someone else that she had wronged in the past finally saw their opportunity to speak up. Either way, people started asking pointed questions in the comments. I saw things like, "Didn't you cheat on him though?" And "Tell us about Tyler," and my personal favorite, "Sounds like he dodged a gold-digging missile." Khloe tried desperately to delete the worst comments as they appeared, but screenshots were already circulating faster than she could control the narrative. And that's when the real chaos started to unfold. Someone with an anonymous throwaway account, and I want to be clear that this wasn't me, posted a comprehensive breakdown of the entire situation online. It included a detailed timeline, receipts, and even direct quotes from her exit strategy document. They didn't include any identifying personal information or actual documents, but there was enough specific detail to make it crystal clear what had really gone down between us. The post blew up pretty quickly. It wasn't exactly viral, but it spread far enough within our local social circles to cause serious damage. Some people posted vague responses like, "Wow, people really aren't who they pretend to be," and "This is why I have trust issues." Others were much more direct with comments like, "Khloe, you owe Marcus a public apology and probably a refund for all the wedding expenses." By Wednesday, she had locked down her Instagram account completely. By Friday, the entire account had been deleted, and she had gone completely silent on all social media platforms. But she wasn't done fighting yet. Before disappearing from the internet entirely, she tried one last desperate move. I received another letter from her attorney, and this time they were claiming emotional damages due to online harassment and libel by association. The legal argument was that because I had thrown the party and created a public narrative, she was now being slandered online and her career trajectory had been negatively affected. They demanded $18,000 in reparations, plus a signed agreement for me to take down any and all media associated with the canceled wedding event. My lawyer, Mr. Clark, almost laughed when he read the demand letter. His response was beautifully concise. Just a two-line email that said, "My client has shared no narrative publicly. If your client's own words are circulating on the internet, perhaps she should have written a better script." After that exchange, there was complete silence from Khloe's legal team. But the drama wasn't quite over yet, because her parents apparently couldn't let things go. Linda and Robert apparently couldn't accept that their daughter was at fault for any of this mess. They started calling around to extended family members and messaging old church friends and childhood neighbors, trying to paint me as this cruel, calculating guy who had weaponized the internet to systematically destroy their daughter's life and reputation. My uncle Ron told them to go pound sand when they called him looking for sympathy. My cousin Maddie actually forwarded me a voice message where Robert called me a spoiled little brat with a victim complex. Really original stuff there, Robert. But nothing that Khloe's parents did compared to what came next in terms of consequences for her actions. You see, Khloe worked in marketing, and in that industry, image and reputation matter tremendously. She had been on this fast track with a major firm, working with Fortune 500 clients and managing big corporate trust accounts. Well, word gets around in professional circles, especially when there's documented evidence of someone's character flaws. A former co-worker of hers, who I guess wasn't particularly fond of her, sent me a direct message on LinkedIn of all places. The message said, "Just wanted you to know that people in the industry talk, and a few major clients are reviewing their contracts with our firm. It might not be public knowledge yet, but she's definitely in hot water professionally." Then I heard through the grapevine that she had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal review of her conduct. I have no idea what that actually means in practical terms, but it sounded like a career pause at minimum, and potentially much worse for her long-term prospects. It wasn't just her job that suffered consequences either. Tyler, the same guy she had sworn was better long-term relationship material, and who had promised that they would be completely set after she locked down her financial arrangements with me, apparently ghosted her entirely. He disappeared without a trace. No social media interactions, no mutual friends following him anymore. Nothing. The guy who was supposed to be her future just vanished the moment things got messy. Khloe even tried reaching out to Riley in a desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. She sent this incredibly long-winded, overly formal email trying to extend an olive branch and clarify the misunderstandings that might have colored Marcus's perception of recent events. She even attached a PDF statement, like she was applying for some kind of refund or formal reconsideration. Riley's response was absolutely perfect. She replied with exactly one sentence. "You lied, you schemed, and you got caught. That's not a misunderstanding, it's just basic math." Complete mic drop moment. After that final exchange, there was nothing else from Chloe or anyone associated with her, at least not directly. I kept things quiet and focused on my normal routine. I continued showing up to work every day, kept helping my team launch our new product line, and took Zoe out to a movie just because I could, and it felt good to do something normal and fun. She didn't ask probing questions about the drama or try to psychoanalyze what I had been through. She just passed me popcorn and whispered sarcastic commentary about the film the entire time. It felt incredibly good to laugh without constantly watching my words or worrying about hidden agendas. Meanwhile, people in my social orbit kept coming up to me with reactions that ranged from impressed to amazed, like I had survived something legendary or pulled off some kind of masterpiece. One guy that I hadn't talked to since freshman year of college sent me a message saying, "Heard what happened with your situation. That's some Ocean's 11 level finesse, bro." Honestly, I'll take that compliment. The best part of all of this is that no one is buying Chloe's victim story anymore. The internet forgets most things pretty quickly, but it tends to remember just enough to ruin someone's week when they try to rewrite history. Chloe had spent years carefully building this perfect image online. The ideal couple, the perfect future, the flawless Instagram grid full of curated moments. Now she can't even show her face at our local coffee shop without people whispering and pointing. I want to be clear that destroying her reputation wasn't my primary goal when I started this whole process. I wasn't trying to ruin her life or make her unemployable. I just wanted to be free from her manipulation and lies. Everything else that happened, the career consequences, the social fallout, Tyler abandoning her, that's just gravity doing its job. When you build your life on deception and treating people like disposable resources, eventually the foundation crumbles. A few weeks after everything had blown up and settled down, things finally started getting genuinely calm. Not the eerie kind of quiet where you're constantly waiting for another shoe to drop, but actual peaceful calm. I hadn't experienced that feeling in a really long time, and I don't think I had realized just how heavy and draining my relationship with Chloe had become until it was completely over. I had been walking around with what felt like a low battery for months, just constantly exhausted and on edge. I had chalked it up to work stress or normal life pressures, but it turns out that constantly being lied to by someone who smiles at you across the dinner table every night drains your energy more than any series of 14-hour business meetings ever could. Chloe didn't attempt to contact me again after her lawsuit threats fizzled out and her lawyer stopped responding. Her parents went completely radio silent as well. The last thing I heard through someone's cousin's girlfriend or some other distant social connection was that she had moved back in with her parents. Her mother was probably pretending it was just a temporary arrangement while quietly rearranging the guest room to accommodate a long-term resident. Whatever the case, I made a conscious decision to stop keeping tabs on her situation. At some point, checking in on people who burned you just becomes a form of self-harm in disguise. I did get one final, unexpected reach out though, and it came from someone I genuinely respected. Her grandmother, Mrs. Helen, had always been different from the rest of Chloe's family. She was old-school Southern manners, always called me Mark instead of Marcus, and made the most incredible peach cobbler on the planet. I think she was the only member of Chloe's entire family who had ever genuinely liked me as a person, rather than just appreciating what I could potentially offer or provide. Mrs. Helen called me one afternoon, and her voice was soft and careful, like she knew she was tiptoeing into an active war zone. She said she wasn't trying to get involved in the drama or take sides, but she just wanted to have a conversation with me. So I let her talk. She told me that Chloe wasn't doing very well emotionally, that her job situation had changed significantly for the worse, and that she wasn't leaving the house much these days. She explained that the rest of the family was trying to support Chloe the best they could during this difficult time. Then she asked me if I had it in my heart to consider helping remove some of the damaging documents and information that were still circulating online. I paused for a moment, not because I was unsure about my answer, but because I didn't want to be unnecessarily cruel to someone who had always treated me with kindness and respect. "Mrs. Helen, I have nothing but respect for you," I told her. "You've never treated me poorly or made me feel unwelcome in your family. But your granddaughter created a detailed blueprint for how to fake an entire marriage, systematically bleed me dry financially, and then move on like I was nothing more than a stepping stone to something better." I continued, "What's already circulating out there isn't mine to remove or control. People made their own decisions about what to share after they heard the truth about what really happened. I didn't smear her reputation or launch some kind of campaign against her. I just stopped covering for her and protecting her from the consequences of her own actions." Mrs. Helen was quiet for a long moment, then said gently, "That's fair, sweetheart. I had to ask, but I understand your position. You take care of yourself, okay? That was the last time I heard from anyone on Chloe's side of this whole mess. I've learned something important from this entire experience that I think is worth sharing. People don't always have to throw bricks at you or attack you directly to destroy your life. Sometimes they just slowly and systematically erase you from the parts of their life that they want to upgrade or improve. And if you're not paying close attention to what's happening, you might even help them do it to you. But I've also learned that rebuilding your life without someone who has been weighing you down feels like taking off a heavy, wet coat that you didn't even realize you'd been wearing for years. The relief is immediate and profound. Riley and I still joke about the party and how everything turned out. She keeps one of the leftover menus framed in her kitchen, right underneath a post-it note that says, "You're not basic if you're the one with the backup plan." It makes me smile every time I see it. Zoe and I are still seeing each other, but we're taking things slowly and naturally. It's not serious or intense yet, and honestly, we both have our own lives and responsibilities to focus on. What's been incredibly refreshing is not feeling pressured to make our relationship fit into some predetermined mold or timeline. We get tacos together, talk trash about reality TV shows, and exist in each other's orbit without heavy expectations or pressure. If it develops into something more serious, that's great. If it doesn't work out long-term, I'm finally okay with the idea of being alone. I ended up selling the old apartment that Chloe and I had shared. I took a financial hit on the sale price because of the timing, but I wanted it completely gone from my life. There were too many ghosts embedded in those floorboards and walls. I didn't even bother telling Chloe about the sale. Her belongings had already been cleared out weeks before through proper legal channels, with all the appropriate paperwork and no unnecessary drama. She didn't even fight for anything or try to claim ownership of shared items. It's funny how something can feel like a warm, loving home one month and then feel like the scene of a crime the next. The emotional associations with that place had been completely poisoned. Looking back on everything that happened, I can see now that Chloe had been showing me exactly who she really was for quite a while before I finally caught on. There were subtle warning signs that I had either ignored or rationalized away. Little jabs and put-downs that she disguised as harmless jokes. The way she would talk about other people behind their backs when they weren't around to defend themselves. Her obsession with maintaining perfect appearances while showing a complete lack of follow-through on anything that actually mattered. But love makes you stupid, or maybe just hopelessly optimistic. Either way, I spent years making excuses for behavior that should have been massive red flags. I kept telling myself that these were just minor personality quirks or temporary stress responses, not fundamental character flaws. Here's the weird part that I'm still processing. I don't actually hate Chloe anymore. That initial anger and sense of betrayal has faded into something more like indifference. I think the reason I can't maintain hatred for her is that the version of her that I fell in love with was never real to begin with. She was essentially a fictional character that existed only in my head, constructed from my own hopes and assumptions rather than reality. So how can you hate someone who never truly existed in the first place? I just hope that she eventually learns something meaningful from this experience and becomes a better person because of it. I hope she develops the capacity for genuine honesty and stops treating other people like disposable resources to be exploited for personal gain. But that's her journey to figure out, not mine to worry about anymore. What I've learned about myself through all of this is that I'm stronger and more resilient than I thought I was. I was able to stay calm and strategic when everything was falling apart around me. I was able to plan and execute a response that protected my interests without becoming vindictive or cruel. And most importantly, I was able to recognize when someone was taking advantage of my trust and put a stop to it before it was too late. I'm grateful that I discovered the truth when I did, rather than finding out after we were legally married and she had access to everything I'd worked for. I'm grateful for friends like Riley, who had my back when things got messy. I'm grateful for the opportunity to start fresh with someone like Zoe, who treats relationships as partnerships rather than strategic acquisitions. The whole experience has taught me to pay closer attention to actions rather than words, to trust my instincts when something feels off, and to never apologize for protecting myself from people who don't have my best interests at heart. So that's my story. It's been a wild ride, and I'm still processing some of the emotional aftermath, but I'm in a much better place now than I was when this all started. I'm curious to hear what you all think about how I handled this situation. Did I go too far with the party idea? Or was it justified given what she was planning to do to me? Have any of you dealt with similar situations where someone you trusted was working against you behind the scenes? Thanks for reading this extremely long story. Writing it all out has actually been pretty therapeutic, and I appreciate you all taking the time to hear me out.